As I'm editing the videos I took of myself building reptile enclosures, I stopped and thought, man, these enclosures I built are really nice. I know it sounds a bit shameless, but the truth is, I am very proud of them. I went into my hard drive and dug up all the videos and photos I have of the enclosures I built over the years. I counted over 100 enclosures of different sizes and designs. Some of them worked well, others failed. To see the progress I've made over the years, we have to go back to where it all began. The year was 2014. I'm in my garage. I used the potato to film myself cutting melamine with an angle grinder. My parents had just taken down an old wardrobe and it was going to the tip anyway, so I thought there's no harm trying to make an enclosure out of it. I didn't own any tools back then, so I borrowed the only power tool I could find from my uncle's shed. It was an angle grinder. It came with a dull blade, which I had no idea that it was meant for cutting concrete and tiles, not wood. The cut was horrible, but I persevered and created my first DIY reptile enclosure for my blue tongue skinks. Around 1 year after the first enclosure, I got the idea of converting old furniture with glass doors into reptile enclosures after seeing one being thrown up by a neighbor. I didn't have to cut any sheets of wood and didn't have to worry about cutting glass either. All I had to do was cut a vent out at the back, add a small strip of wood at the bottom to hold substrate in, and add light fittings for the heat lamps. From there, I converted and sold around 10 to 15 reptile enclosures. I even experimented with making a secret heated snake hide, where the snake could go into one of the drawers of the cabinet. I didn't make a lot of money from these enclosures, but I did make enough for some basic second-hand tools, which included a $40 wobbly table saw that didn't cut straight. But I soon realized that converted reptile enclosures is almost never going to be as good as purpose-built reptile enclosures. They're just not designed to house reptiles in the first place. The glass doors are never secure enough, and the wood is usually very prone to water damage. So with a few new tools and some newfound knowledge from a couple of YouTube videos, I started making my own melamine enclosures. From then on, I built and sold melamine enclosures during every school holiday and free time I had. When I was not building enclosures for clients, I would be building new enclosures for myself. I kept selling my used enclosures every few months and replacing it with new and improved versions. I was actually getting a lot of orders back then. That was probably because I was one of the cheapest sellers around. I managed to build and sell over 60 melamine enclosures within 2 to 3 years. During this time, I poured in a lot of time and effort but didn't make a lot of money. Whatever I earned, I put towards my reptile hobby and acquiring better tools. Looking back, I did gain a lot of experience from doing that. And because of the high volume of enclosures I was building, I was able to learn through trial and error. From something as small as what type of screw to use, to air vent placement, to the type of blades to use for cutting wood, and to the order of assembly. Through learning from my mistakes, I have refined my enclosure builds to a point where every step and every material used are intentional and deliberate. Building so many enclosures also meant that I got a lot of practice in doing the basic fundamentals right, like how to cut something straight and square, and how to drill perpendicular without the screw breaking up from the sides. I also experimented with building with different materials and building enclosures with different designs. One experiment was building with aluminium and coil flute. I was hoping to make something waterproof yet lightweight. I managed to make exactly that, a 2 meter by 2 meter lace monitor enclosure that can be lifted by 2 people. It was strong enough to house a lace monitor, but the white coil flute stained easily, making it look really dirty. So I didn't make any more enclosures out of coil flute after that. At the same time, I discovered foam ply, a very water resistant material that is very strong and very easy to clean. I also really like my enclosures in the black color. In the end, I combined the best of both worlds and came up with the design I'm building these days. Foam ply enclosures with aluminium and glass fronts. They are waterproof, strong, easy to clean, black in color, and have large full glass fronts for viewing. I did sacrifice on portability as these enclosures are quite heavy, but I would say it's worth it. There were a few other things that I also tried and experimented with over the last 7 years. One of them is a semi-aquatic enclosure. I've always loved the idea of seeing reptiles swim through an aquarium. The first attempt was when I was still converting furniture. I got a large cabinet and converted it into a water dragon enclosure, but the wood rotted within a year, so I saved the aquarium in glass and built a melamine version of it. One thing I added to this design is to put the aquarium on wheels so I can slide it out like a drawer for maintenance, but that didn't work out the way I thought it would. It didn't slide smoothly as the tank is heavy when filled with water. I also built and sold one with a small aquarium built in. These melamine enclosures can last quite a few years, but the moisture does eventually make it into the wood and cause it to swell no matter how well I seal it with silicone. This was eventually resolved when I discovered foam ply. My latest attempt of a semi-aquatic enclosure was made out of foam ply. It would have lasted me for years if a mangrove monitor didn't outgrow it. So this is the enclosure it's in now. I also made a lightweight enclosure without a floor to go over a 6-foot fish tank for a client. It was made out of aluminium frame and plywood, with a painted on waterproofing membrane. It works quite well, but the only concern I had is that the waterproofing membrane is not smooth, so it's harder to clean. I've made a few reptile racks back in 2015. The first one I made didn't have grooves for the heat cord to sit in. Then I got a router and was able to make grooves. But I didn't like how heavy and wobbly a tall rack is, so I experimented with building with aluminium and polycarbonate sheets. For this design, steel threaded rods are what's holding up the shelves, so the height of each shelf can be adjusted. And the heat cord is threaded within the polycarbonate sheet, so nothing gets in the way. But after a year or so, I moved away from using racks altogether because I didn't see a point in keeping a reptile if I can't see it in its enclosure. I also gave making fake rocks a go. Even though they can look really good, and gave my reptile something natural to climb on, they are harder to clean and take a long time to make. I just don't have the time for that these days. Maybe if I practice more, I will get better results within a shorter time frame, but I never gave myself the opportunity to develop that skill. And finally, before I made my outdoor lace monitor enclosure, I actually made another outdoor enclosure in 2015 for water dragons, bearded dragons and blue-tongued skinks. Since it was during a time where I couldn't build very well and had limited tools, I bought a cheap dog enclosure to use as the main structure. Everything about that enclosure was a fail. The side barriers were made out of chipboard that started falling apart after 3 years. It probably would have lasted me only a year if I didn't paint it with exterior paint. There's a lot of gaps where the sides met, and I just patched it up with small sheets of mesh. It wasn't secure at all, and I had lizards escape. The roof had no support, so when it rained, water would collect in the middle and bow inwards. I would have to regularly push the roof up from the inside of the enclosure just to let the water slide off. The roof was also attached to the sides using nothing but zip ties. I would need to replace zip ties one after another whenever the winds were strong. Below all the mulch was just a wheat mat, which didn't do anything in terms of preventing lizards from digging out. The one thing this original enclosure offered was letting me know what not to do in the future. And that's something really valuable. Eventually, I made my outdoor lace monitor enclosure, and it came out exactly the way I wanted it to. I haven't ran into any issues with it yet, even after a few storms, and I haven't had to repair anything at all so far. Who would have thought that a kid with no tools, skills, or experience could learn everything on the internet and build his tool collection up from selling enclosures? I would be foolish to think that I've approached the end of my enclosure building journey. I think there's still a lot more improvements that can be made, so I'm very excited to see where I will be 7 years from now. The most valuable thing I learned over the years of building reptile enclosures is that you gain more from getting things wrong than from getting them right the first time unintentionally. So if you've never built anything before, don't be scared to start. And if you've built something before and failed, don't be scared to try again.